Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. This is Tim Cummins from IACCM and our topic today, taking contract automation to the edge of the enterprise. And delighted to be working on this particular session with Arthur Raguette, who as you can see is Executive Vice President at Ultria. Ultria being a pretty new entrant into the contract lifecycle management space, but being a new entrant, of course, coming in with some interesting new approaches and ideas. But Arthur himself is, well, I hesitate to call anybody a veteran in case they feel insulted by it, but he has plenty of experience, let me put it this way, in our particular space, and bringing that knowledge and experience to bear in the development of the Ultria product. So you can see here his brief bio and then also mine, which I'm not going to dwell on because probably many of you at least know my name and know that I am CEO of IACCM, and so that probably is all we really need to say about me. So let's move and talk a little bit about the background to this. There is tremendous opportunity. We know that many of our members are anxious and concerned about the absence of automation, that unlike pretty much every other function in the business, contract management really has not been served well by technology, that it is not particularly streamlining or facilitating better service to the business. It is not in general necessarily generating the right sort of analytics at a portfolio level or at an individual contract level. And indeed, we're in the midst of large-scale survey right now, and any of you who would like to participate in it, we'd love to have your thoughts and inputs to it. But with several hundred respondents already in, we're getting a very clear message that says the satisfaction levels with current contract lifecycle management solutions is rating a pretty miserable 4.2 out of 10, with 10 obviously being highly satisfied. And indeed, the rating of those who are users of the system, that is people perhaps in project management or sales or procurement, but beyond the sort of core contract management and legal groups, is even lower. That's only around 3.6 out of 10. Now, of course, that then helps to account for the fact that the experience in most organizations is that where they have it implemented, and many, by the way, have implemented multiple systems, not just one, there are disappointingly low levels of user adoption. Having an enterprise-wide system is absolutely the exception, not the norm. And for most organizations, therefore, they've finished up with a fairly expensive repository, which they may also use as a searchable database, but that is really the extent. And of course, that doesn't cross boundaries, it doesn't cross borders, it doesn't take contract management automation to the edge of the enterprise, let alone beyond it. And what we're seeing absolutely now as good practice is, of course, not only systems that really do automate and streamline and create sort of a reduction of friction within the company, but importantly that they start to cross the border and facilitate better communication, better consolidation of data, shared information with customers or with suppliers. Now, of course, one can easily turn around and point the finger at the providers in this case, and that really would be unfair, because I think one of the biggest challenges here is the failure by many contract management and legal groups to really get the corporate buy-in that's needed to create clear ownership of the overall contracting process and to ensure that the systems they're implementing are really being accompanied by a thoughtful approach to the overall process design. All too often, we've simply sought to automate what is already a relatively inefficient and ineffective business process, which of course is where the big issue for the users comes in, because it's the process they don't like often, not just the system. So we do need to be very thoughtful about that. I'm sure it's an area of which Arthur is going to have many comments, because, you know, our story here is about the point that there are now key emerging technologies that really do offer a new start. And Ultria certainly has every ambition to be one of those. So Arthur, with that, let's pass over to you and let's have the Ultria ultria story and how that's going to potentially change the life of the contract management community.
Well, Tim, thank you very much for such setting the bar very high in terms of expectations. And certainly from an ultria perspective, we look forward to meeting that challenge. Today's session, very much is focused on maybe helping those corporates who have not yet established a revised process or a renewed perspective on their environment to try things new through alternate approaches. Certainly the goal is to extend the control that we anticipate and that we look forward to and that we embrace in contract lifecycle management platforms out from the center of the organization where it typically resides out to the edge. And when I say the edge of the enterprise, Tim and I were talking briefly before today's call started. It's not just to the edge of the organization, but then beyond. Getting past the physical limitations or even the virtual limitations of today's modern enterprise out to the broader ecosystem, because the extended value chain today is long and it's wide and it's distant and it's multilingual and it's multi-currency, and it stems from that global supply chain through a complex maze of operation and business as usual out to those folks who are buying your end products or services. So the goal, I believe, or at least our vision as Ultria, is to extend the contract lifecycle management process and capabilities beyond the point of simple drafting and filing and reporting, but to post-award management, to active engagement of the key stakeholders both within and without the organization. So at a very high level, contract lifecycle management can empower at the edge of the enterprise the user community closest to the trading partner, right? Whether it's a customer, employee, or vendor. You want to empower these people to have the appropriate contract information they need when they need it in a way or manner that makes most sense for them. This is not just about increasing user adoption, it's about increasing empowerment. And I think Tim's phrase was to reduce friction. Having access to contract information, post-award, is absolutely key to minimizing friction, to minimizing disruption, to creating a much smoother running value chain. And part and parcel of that, of course, is ensuring that these contracts are crafted properly with the appropriate stakeholders and that it's done in a smooth way. Which brings us probably to some of the ideas of automation, right? We automate the process itself of drafting or assembling or crafting agreements. We can automate the workflow, the approval, the collaborative process. We can facilitate and assist through automation the negotiation or the communication with external trading parties. We can, to a certain degree, automate the collection and assimilation of information from operational systems and the CLM. But I guess the overall question that many of you have asked is, to what end? Why should we? How can we? And what are the end results of doing that? So if I take sort of a nuts and bolts or maybe a more physical approach to start off with, a lot of the folks on today's call have something of an IT-friendly background, or at least a systems-related background. And because we are who we are, we tend to look at the world revolving around our contracts, the contracting process, and the contracting systems that support it. So if I'm looking at connecting big boxes, the kind of things that makes CIOs go, ooh, ah, right? The ability to take a contract lifecycle management platform and have it integrate with or share information with your core ERP, the Enterprise Resource Planning Platform. Right? Sharing data yields improved compliance and performance reporting in a post-award world. Fairly straightforward. For an enterprise deployment of a CLM, oftentimes a large number of paper or contracts are related to independent contractors or contingent temporary staff, being able to integrate the CLM with your HRMS provides for increased visibility in tracking things like non-disclosure or confidentiality or non-compete agreements with your contingent or 1099 base. Integrating with your financial management platforms is really about sharing contract risk with risk management or risk portfolio systems that may be within your FMS, your financial management systems. For those organizations that are using FMS purely for capital treasury requirements, using instead the risk profile, risk analysis, risk robot capabilities of the contract lifecycle platform to help manage a combined holistic view of operational, contractual, and financial risk may also be the preferred alternative. And last but not least, for those organizations who are customer focused, and really that's the reason that many of us exist, the ability to integrate with your customer-facing or distributor or licensee-facing systems, whether it be your Salesforce CRM or an order management or an order-to-cash system. Clearly, the contract lifecycle platform is the ideal location for capturing all sales agreements and sales contracts, right? Pull them out of the CRM, put them into the repository, and once they're in the repository, you've got the ability to share information with your operational systems, with your financial systems, and with your overall performance and obligation management process. So just as we may look at technical integrations occurring, there is a process integration. As Tim denoted, one of the challenges with user adoption is not so much that the systems aren't out there, it's that people or corporates have attempted to automate broken processes. Automation within a stovepipe has limited value to the organization, and truly it's the ability to share responsibility, to collaborate amongst, to leverage subject matter and people and process across multiple stovepipes that makes for a smoother running, less friction-filled organization. So contract processes should be shared across functions similarly. So before we start to irritate a lot of you on the phone, it'd be interesting to run a quick poll to find out what department or function do you most identify with. And for those of you unfamiliar, please ask questions through the tool and Mark can help you out. But our choices today are A, sales, B, procurement, C, human resources, D, finance, or E, do you associate yourself dedicated contract management or administration or the legal team? So please, we'll take a moment or two before we close our poll. So the poll is open. And again, A for sales, B for procurement, C for human resources, D for finance, or E for dedicated contract management, contract administration, or the legal team. And we'll ask the organizer to close the poll. Excellent. Can we take a look at the poll results?
Yeah, Arthur, I can't tell whether you can see them, but they are up there now. Sales.
Perfect. I'm probably the one person who can't see them, but it's okay.
Sales is at 14%, procurement at 29%, 0 human resources, finance is at 10%, and dedicated contract administration / legal is at 47%.
Wow, so perfect. So we have a good sort of construct of the market in general. Very interesting. So almost half are dedicated contract legal admin, a slight advantage to procurement for about a third, and then about 1/7 sitting in sales. Perfect.
And I think very, very interesting, Arthur, if I can make the comment, that I think it's very interesting that when you look at comparative levels of automation of procurement versus other functions, of course the investment generally in procurement systems has been much higher. But there too, unfortunately, it's very often been driven by really ERP-based thinking, which is not assisting procurement in the more complex and more strategic business activities which they're today required to undertake. So while obviously there may be ERP-based systems that are fine when it comes to doing reverse auctions or for pure commodity acquisition, such a high proportion of business today is really moving into the indirect space and away from that commodity type model that it is, I think, leaving many procurement organizations feeling the need to go out to the market and understand how do they actually deal with those higher profile and higher value areas of activity.
No, that's a fantastic insight, and I think that the suggestion is well positioned. Seeing the sort of the rise of the ERP-oriented contract platform, so many of these I think came with the acquisition of sourcing or P2P platforms, by the ERP vendors, right? So if we look at some of these companies and where they sort of sourced, no pun intended, their CLMs from. This kind of transactional direct material model focused around typically manufacturing the ERP flavor does leave so much of a gap around leveraging the asset of the contract itself. We find over and over again being able to leverage for post-award performance, compliance, and obligation management is where procurement can manage sustainable, repeatable savings, just as sales can create longer value relationships with their customers and channels. And it's by extending the life cycle, not just to the edge of the organization, but also past the normal sort of life of a contract, being it's executed, it's stored, it's done, versus it's executed, it now memorializes a relationship, and this relationship was crafted with best intentions. We, being both sides of that relationship, should leverage that contract vehicle for maximum value. And I'm not sure how much of that interleaves with better communication and collaboration internally with stakeholders, as well as our external sort of negotiated parties. That'd be very interesting to see over time. I mean, to that point, I think at the edge of the organization, or the periphery, if you will, each core function has really different trading partners that they interact with. I mean, this should be fairly straightforward stuff for most of us on the call, right? So sales worries about customers, distributors, licensees, and their function or their leverage of a contract platform is to close deals as quickly as possible without leaving any money or revenue on the table. At the same time, they're trying to create long-term value relationships. On the flip side, procurement's challenge is a little different. They're looking to get highest quality at lowest cost and do that in a sustainable, repeatable way by converting their vendors to long-term strategic partners. Other business units or other operations, right, whether it is HR, facilities, maybe even core manufacturing, they're looking to find the most efficient sources of supply in many ways at the lowest cost to ensure smooth business as usual operations. And I think a key responsibility for operations is also to prepare for contingencies. And I think contract management has some unique value proposition there for those who are managing sort of the sub-force majeure risk or contingency planning. Finance and their interaction with financial institutions, capital markets, etc., has a rather specific need or requirement that is often not shared or common with the other business units, but nevertheless they've got a core seat at the table. So just to understand who we have with us today, maybe our second poll of the morning or the afternoon, as the case may be, poll will open shortly for which contracting parties, both internal and external, give you guys the hardest time. So knowing that we've got, I think it was 46% of our audience is core contract, legal, administration, who gives you guys the hardest time? Let's open the poll. A for sales, B for procurement, C for customers, D for vendors, and E for contractors. just checking with the organizer. Is the poll open? Okay, as compared to radio silence, I'm going to presume that there is a slight technical difficulty.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, Mark, have you opened the poll?
Yes, it's running.
Perfect. Sorry, I hadn't seen it pop up.
And sorry, somehow I got muted. Yes, the results are in. The polls are open. The results are in. Sales at 35%, procurement at 18%, customers at 31%, vendors at 6%, and contractors at 10%.
Wow. So given the discussion earlier that Tim had raised, that the largest sort of invest amongst the major groups has been with procurement, yet procurement is the least hassled and their vendors are the easiest to work with of all the external parties. Yet customers overwhelmingly are the challenge, and sales seems to be next in line. That's a great takeaway. Thanks very much for posting and showing those poll results. So what does this mean? How do we extend both the sort of the user adoption curve, user satisfaction curve, and then maybe take care of these cranky trading partners, being your internal sales organization and your external customers? I find this absolutely intriguing. So, maybe, and this is a great segue, let's start with what do we do with sales and customers? So, without getting a level of automation extended out to the sales team and making it somewhat easy for them, and likewise, by extension, enabling customers to gain the right amount of access to the contract lifecycle process, sales cycles are longer. And this is in direct contradiction to the main goal of most sales organizations, which is to shorten the sales cycle. So in a loosely automated process, right, you end up with an elongated sales cycle and one that has an increased odds or an increased chance of getting miscommunication between sales and the customer, as well as the introduction of errors, even if it's simple mathematical. The challenge, too, is if you're not sort of streamlining this process, sales becomes gun-shy pretty quick and puts too much reliance on central legal, moving the bottleneck from sales operations, sales management, clearly onto legal shoulders, at least in terms of KPIs and turnaround time SLAs. Additionally, once you start involving this sort of extension or intertwining of sales ops, and legal, we start to lose track of contractual obligations, which is going to make it real challenging when we look at performance or obligation management post-award. All right, so by automating and streamlining and integrating this process, remember my earlier slide, right? Enabling or tying together your customer relationship management and your order management and your order to cash kind of platform with your contract management systems does a few things and does a few things incredibly well, right? People are increasingly using their CRMs today to effectively flip proposals to agreements, right? Or quotes into amendments and addendums for master agreements. By integrating and streamlining and automating in a context and content aware way, which is where sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning come in, this process, you can take relatively new or fresh or inexperienced sales professionals and have them seamlessly transform proposals to agreements to take quotes and move them seamlessly into sub-agreements or service agreements or bolt-ons to master contracts or master agreements to improve customer satisfaction and to increase communication between the customer and the sales organization to get faster contract approvals and to shorten the overall sales cycle, and at the same time delivering a more accurate and more engaged experience. This also enables some great interactivity between sales and central finance or contracting. Because now, by automating this platform, right, by integrating these two, I can seamlessly bring over my milestones, my obligations, my performance levels, and provide for notifications of expiry, renewal, thresholds being met, non-performance being raised, and have the appropriate notification pushed out to the right stakeholders. Because telling a sales guy that his team is not performing is not going to fix the problem. Right? That team, the team leads, the project managers, they need to know. If the product is underperforming, product management, marketing, customer support, and service need to know. Having these milestones at the start enable both sides of the contract to understand what their obligations are. Leveraging the notification and messaging ensures that both sides meet those obligations or are aware that they are trending against them. There's also great feedback and input to the risk management process. Now, the actual workflow for getting contracts or agreements crafted in sales is pretty straightforward, right? So in our world, salesperson would initiate the contract in their CRM, right? So sitting within Salesforce, right, within SAP, within Oracle, create the order, create a proposal, and then from that, the system would select the template, internal or external. So based on the size of the business or size of the customer relationship, do you use your paper or do you take in customer paper? If it's customer paper, have that parsed, disassembled, and put into the contract management process. Then ensure that the right stakeholders internally are involved in the approval process for internal collaboration. Bring in the suggested red lines and changes, and then assist in the multi-party negotiation, the external party. And then having this multidisciplinary team be the recipients after the award, after the contract's been loaded, of any messages, updates, notifications, thresholds, and the like, bringing operational value from the contract back to the organization. Now, the stakeholder involvement throughout this process is going to be different whether it's sales or whether it's procurement or operations. So if we just look at this as an example of sales and legal sort of being jointly responsible for the initial drafting, sales responsible for some of the performance tracking, but then ongoing obligations being a mix of sales, legal, and perhaps operations. Ultimately, the driving value for the sales organization is the reduction in bottlenecks by leveraging pre-approved templates and clauses, reduced reliance on corporate legal because it's been encapsulated and embodied with pre-vetted, pre-approved content that enables sales to move at their speed, generates, of course, a shorter sales cycle, quicker time to close, and then ongoing better obligation management, which really, when it comes down to it, is all about minimizing revenue leakage. Right, so the sell-side obligation are to ensure that the proper deliveries are met so that payment milestones are in fact delivered and cash flows as planned. So in order to increase user adoption for the sales or perhaps sales and marketing side of an organization, it's about automating the drafting and collaboration process to leverage those assets that legal has invested in, and tying the process not to necessarily the contract offer and approval process, but to the sales execution process, and insert the gates that are required by good contract management discipline. Now we'll briefly touch on finance. As I mentioned, they've got some unique needs, of course, and they are a stakeholder of sorts, but generally a smaller team. For them, some of the issues that they face without an automated platform that tightly couples to their business needs is that they lack visibility into contract performance for their capital markets, their trading partner, and their investment partners. Right, they're rather spreadsheet intensive, of course, but this sort of minimizes the ease of tracking for financial obligation and increased challenges in risk management simply because they don't have a holistic view of the organization's risk exposure. By providing a tighter coupling to the contract lifecycle process, we see comprehensive risk management becoming a much stronger reality, with the ability to track key deliverables, whether they are point solution or a regular milestone, and this only serves to improve and ensure proper performance and compliance tracking. the ability to extract key metadata from the contracts and report upon them across their own areas of responsibility, but also to support those other areas, perhaps sales and procurement for finance management, is made ever increasingly so possible through the extracted metadata of both in-house template as well as parsed third-party templates. And this creates, of course, searchable and tractable obligation management for effective tracking and resolution. So ultimately, the value driven for finance through automation is enhanced performance tracking, better risk mitigation, and the enablement of user-defined dashboards and reports, almost bordering on enterprise BI. And we've got several implementations where the business intelligence framework for finance and risk has been extended to support operational data coming from ERPs or MRP platforms. We often overlook the core operations group, and in many ways operations has similar function to procurement, but again, it's giving people the ability to access information. Where sales, we talked about integration with the CRM so that even your telesales people can flip a proposal to an order to a contract with a series of mouse clicks. Operations has a slightly different challenge, right? If I'm looking at the HR kind of function, being able to manage non-disclosure, non-competes, without having a coordinated, disciplined process, if you're the typical global corporate that's acquired multiple teams over time, this information is stored typically across the organization in different geographies, different business units, different teams, and you may not have a holistic view. And that holistic view certainly has not been merged with your HRMS. If you're on the facility side of things, whether it be something like, well, cafeteria or just ongoing maintenance repair operations of a factory or a plant or a facility, how can you successfully manage long-term contract relationships where SLAs were set 3 years ago and the contract is buried someplace at corporate and not currently at the operation fingertip? This creates additional challenges in tracking and managing vendor obligations and vendor performance. So if we extend two different main roles of the CLM out to operations, the first is a request portal, right? So that HR, when they're onboarding an employee, can run that employee through a self-service environment for putting in their non-compete, putting in their benefits information. Why not extend sort of the employment agreement of employment onboarding to include any other sort of mandatory checkbox, fill in the forms, non-negotiable, sign here with an e-sig, to offset or offload some of the responsibilities of HR, especially if we're looking at independent contractors or contingent staffing. Can I extend that same functionality of a request portal off to operations? So if I've got remote facilities and they are contracting or seeking different services from different kinds of vendors or providers, or leveraging national contracts for local distributor, licensee, or franchise, can I do this instead through a self-service environment? Based on the service required, guide that user to the right contract template. Based on the geography, bring in the right clause, right? The right jurisdiction. And then using smart clauses and smart context, bring in service level details for professional services or subsidiary agreements to minimize the back and forth between facilities and legal, and yet optimize our contract usage while minimizing risk. So minimize time, minimize risk, optimize usage, and get net gain results. What's interesting in operations is very similar to sales in that they share responsibility for getting things crafted with the legal organization, and the request portal sort of removes or significantly reduces legal or contract time spent on task. And yet performance tracking is almost entirely up to facilities or HR. And it's only when performance is not met, that we see the re-engagement of legal in a meaningful way. Having shared common access to the post-award environment for performance tracking and obligation tracking is absolutely key for that seamless handoff between operations, facilities, HR, and legal. So ultimately, the driving value here, not unlike the others, is minimizing errors, minimizing risk in contracts that are created by leveraging the portal environment and leveraging context or content aware based on common query. So that people on the operations side can simply ask for a contract using common English, allow the software to just assemble the request, understand what contract template should be used, what clauses should be introduced, using the parameters of the user, the business unit, the geography, to effectively assemble on demand a pre-vetted, pre-approved document that can then be routed quickly for internal collaboration and then shared externally with the other party. Now, procurement, since almost a third of us today, I guess, are on the procurement side, we'll spend a little bit more time here, and glad that the order sort of worked out in this particular way, right? So procurement organizations, your key is looking at maintaining a supply base over time with high quality at low cost. Being able to monitor supplier performance over time can be a challenge unless you've got your supplier performance management, contract management integration. And ultimately, you're trying to align a global procurement strategy across multiple local geographies. So it's about empowering people truly at the edge of the organization by giving them centralized, pre-vetted information that can be sort of spread and empowered. So by having a fully automated contract compliance, contract authoring, contract repository that ties to your operational systems and ties to your supplier vendor management systems, you can provide a stronger, more transparent relationship with your vendor, and therefore, I think, increase the business value to your internal stakeholders, to your internal customers. But ultimately, of course, you're looking to establish an effective global supply chain platform to lead to sustainable, repeatable cost savings. Now, the workflow for procurement is the most self-sufficient across any organization. And I think that's because of the important role that contracting has played, of course. And I'm sure many of you are silently nodding your head or screaming into your muted phone going, yes, absolutely right. However, risk mitigation in a global world increasingly requires legal involvement at the upfront, right? So although the template definitions, the template pushes are going to be category or commodity, or geography oriented. And again, this is where artificial intelligence, machine-based learning for preferences kicks in, and the automated assembly and drafting, at least of straw man framework documents, comes into play. This is still an area where for cross-border, trans-border, you want to ensure that you've got your legal team representing your global risk portfolio, right? But overall, contract vendor performance is managed typically by procurement directly, with maybe a little bit of input from operations, and really until it gets to be almost ballistic, obligation fights or obligation challenges are handled very much by procurement. So unlike some of the other stakeholder maps that we've seen, this is one where procurement tends to lead from the front all the way through execution, with legal really being responsible for that initial creation around risk mitigation and so forth. So the driving value obviously for CLM in our world is extending the reach of the CLM platform back into those procure-to-pay, supply chain, vendor management, supplier scorecarding, supplier performance measurement frameworks, whether they be part of a core ERP or part of your P2P platforms. The ability to sort of cross in and among these. Now, the reason that we view the CLM functionality as separate here is that it's not uncommon that we will find multiple P2P or procure-to-pay platforms or multiple vendor management, supplier management platforms being deployed in a typical MNC, right, a multinational. It's contract centralization or contract compliance that may be the most holistic 360-degree view. And as organizations not just flatten, but extend their value chain. Being able to view risk, to do contingency planning in many ways for abrupt changes in your supply chain, which can disrupt obviously the rest of your value chain, is relegated to contract administration. It's the single place where you've got both buy and sell information, where you know what your obligations are as an organization, both to your trusted supply partners in terms of what volume commits you may have made, but also to those commitments that you've made to your customers. And I think it's an unusual point of intersection that the industry has really yet to embrace. For whatever reason, and we saw this, of course, at IACCM in October, the importance of risk and risk management is there. The importance of globalization and managing globalized risk is there. Looking for an ideal process, place, and componentry to do that, to us, anyway, from an Ultria perspective, means getting down to having performance and obligation and compliance management as an integral part of your contract lifecycle. And not just the technology. Yes, contract lifecycle management platforms need to have obligation, performance, and compliance management as part and parcel of the framework. But just as similarly, our customers need to embrace that as a best practice, that the contract isn't done when it's executed. It's done when the obligations of the contract have been met. And when we think about that in both supplier terms, customer terms, and also, yes, in employee terms, is when we have a more holistic view and I think much more long-term relationships with our value chain partners. So I didn't mean to make that sound like I was preaching from the pulpit. I'm sure everyone here shares or has very similar ideas. So with the limited 10 minutes or so that we have left, I'll try to make this brief. I'll keep the commercials to a minimum. Ultimately, taking contract automation to the edge of the enterprise drives great value in a couple of ways. Certainly we've seen that by introducing the concept of request portals, leveraging both parametric information about your user community combined with context and content-aware decision-making software, and that is where the AI and machine-based learning kick in. We can fast-track content assembly rather than greenfield, sort of contract authoring. And we want to assemble with well-known, well-approved, vetted building blocks to shorten that turnaround time. Certainly from a repository and storage perspective, having a common global framework, but one that has the confidential and secure views for each business unit, business group, and user community enables good information sharing, both to and from. And I think this is something that is often missed. We often think about exporting contract information into other systems. It's rare that we think about bringing other systems information into the contract management platform. If you're looking at having a unified or holistic obligation and performance system, we need to be able to pass information back and forth. And that's really where we hit a high level of maturity, which we'll get to in another minute. This enables the performance tracking and obligation management that helps an organization minimize revenue leakage and maximize its ongoing savings. And for the employees or contingent workforce, helps establish brand loyalty within the organization, as well as that kind of brand loyalty that is external to your long-term value propositions with your customers, distributors, and franchisees. So CLM functions and features should extend out of the core organization that we're so used to seeing, literally to that edge of the organization. You want to provide contract stub, contract guidance, and automatic sort of flipping or conversion capability to your sales team. You want to be able to fully embrace vendor management, vendor performance on top of contract obligations for your strategic sourcing and procurement teams. You need to be able to tie contingent workforce or temporary labor management systems to those contract systems for compliance and reporting. It's really sort of simultaneously enabling to see sales, procurement, HR, facilities, legal, finance, taking advantage of a common repository. And it's by doing a very light level of integration with your ERP, your CRM, your HRMS platforms that enables information, but it's really bringing the change management to these communities that empowers the extended value chain. So we certainly talked about some of the, you know what, I'll say these, you guys can reread them. But yes, it is about achieving contract milestones from a financial management and performance perspective, reducing risk across the board by leveraging a robust and controlled authoring environment. I think this is the last poll of this, today's session, and very much interested in seeing where everyone is today. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being sort of the most mature, where do you find yourself on a maturity scale? 1 being a manual process, so email-based contracting, right? Back and forth, Word docs, limited automation, if any, and contracts stored on the shared drive, SharePoint, etc. Right. Number 2, central repository, contracts stored centrally with access control, common document repository perhaps, but drafting process still somewhat manual. Version control, basically being maybe automated numbers tracked in a spreadsheet, if that. Middle of the road, number 3, automated drafting. You've got configurable approval workflows, collaborative contract creation internally. So you're seeing faster contract creation through pre-approved templates and clauses. Or have you reached level 4? Performance management. You're tracking contract KPIs in real or near real time. You've got one-way data flow from outside systems into the CLM. And it's possible that you started to have smart clauses linked to external triggers. And we do have some sessions coming up on blockchain and the like, but those of you who may be taking advantage of some of that. Or 5, have you reached the level of integrated process where the CLM system is tightly integrated with your other technical systems and you are looking at bidirectional information exchange? And hopefully as we wrap up, some of you will have questions about how your organizations have taken advantage of this, and I'll have some questions for you perhaps as to whether you've been able to take full advantage of your technical maturity with your process maturity. So please, as we go through the next 1 or 2 slides, do take some time and start entering the rest of the questions that you might have. I see some of you already have.
Okay, the results.
Just the mandatory advert, and I'll keep it brief. The Ultria platform, Ultria CLM, is an enterprise-grade, cloud-based, software-as-a-service deployed solution. We originally OEM'd this from a Forrester leading procurement platform, and we've repurposed or re-engineered it to work for the other domains. So it started with procurement, and we've extended to sales, HR, facilities, finance. This expands CLM support across that value chain with a much lighter, faster integration layer for really taking advantage of the information that's available in the other systems. Our vision as a company is to leverage artificial intelligence and machine learning, learned by example, to simplify the drafting and creation process while simultaneously empowering the next generation smart contracts. So having clauses that are smart, that have agents that listen, whether it be to a particular commodities feed or just to press releases and news on the web, to trigger alert and in fact trigger actual transactions in the case of blockchain to execute business. This allows us to extend our vision beyond the edge of the enterprise, to bring the right information to the people closest to the trading partners in the way that they can use it best. Part and parcel of this is a process that we've just patented, or we're patent pending, which is to automatically disassemble third-party content. So this impacts predominantly sales, some degree procurement, occasionally finance. To take third-party contract paper that you may be sort of forced due to business exigencies to use, but to automatically disassemble it into its individual clauses and then run it through the contract lifecycle management process, including internal collaboration, risk rating, internal negotiation, and then, of course, external redline and version control. It levels the playing field in many ways, because historically we've often thought whoever uses their paper wins. This now may give you the flexibility to allow a false concession to the opposing party, if we're thinking win-lose, or simply to facilitate open and rapid communication amongst interested parties if we think win-win. With that, I'd like to thank everyone and just take a minute or two while I open up the question panel.
Yeah, thank you, Arthur. And we do have a few questions. A couple of points, if I may quickly, I'd like to make. I think your final slide particularly is of critical importance. We are seeing a real leadership trend, I suppose, away from the template-based world, which of course has levels of rigidity in it, which often means that the contracts that we put in place are not really well suited to the situation we're trying to manage, and frequently the terms that we deploy either create that tension, that friction between the parties, or alternatively they undermine the opportunities for better trading value and for meaningful negotiation. So we're seeing a very real shift towards much more databases of terms and term options, or even of contracting term principles rather than necessarily fully drafted clauses. And where that begins to play, of course, is with the intelligent front end. It starts to deploy the tacit knowledge utilizing artificial intelligence to turn it into real knowledge. I think that's a really exciting development, and one where we are absolutely seeing a small number at the moment, but certainly leading corporations absolutely moving down that path. So I think the stuff you were touching on there at the end about that deployment of artificial intelligence, potentially with blockchain supplementing it, is clearly one of the major trends that we are likely to see. Now, in terms of questions, there was a comment from Dennis, actually a very appropriate one, and said when we were looking at the functions that maybe represent obstacles to getting this to happen, we really should have included a selection for the IT function. And I think that's absolutely correct, Arthur. I'm sure you see that challenge, and we do need to equip our procurement, legal, contract management groups, I suppose, with far more material to help them to get IT to understand why these systems really matter, and why just a simple ERP extension is not going to fix the problem.
Now, that's a fantastic question, and I think you highlighted it very well. That of all the sort of transactional environments, if I can consider a CLM or contract management platform transactional, it has the hardest to quantify value to IT, which tend to think in terms of very short term. A CRM, I know orders go out. Procurement, I can relate to having to get a better price on things. IT themselves are big users or big collaborators with procurement. So they also probably tend to think contracting is generally a procurement function, and procurement is generally part of an ERP platform, so why go much farther than that? I guess, and this may just be conjecture on my part, the rise of Salesforce as a cloud-based CRM solution, which I believe has been somewhat prevalent, is starting to change the way that IT organizations are viewing not just technology. I think with the sort of the advent and support of cloud, I think they're starting to see that there are parts of the organization that can get solutions and will bypass IT given a choice. And I have to say sales is probably one of the greater culprits. Maybe marketing would be number 2 in that space. So does it make sense that we start to benchmark financial gain from the CLMS for IT so that they see this in more tangible terms? I mean, is that something that can open the eyes of IT, or do we want to try to convince them just based on technical merits of, hey, this is using AI, you can play with this stuff, it's cool? I mean, what are your thoughts, Tim? Is this something where the business value benefit equation is strong enough to overcome that initial, I don't say ignorance in a bad way, but perhaps just lack of knowledge on IT's part?
Yes, absolutely, and certainly an area where we help quite a number of our members to build that case, because of course I think many have tried and failed to represent the ROI on contract lifecycle management based on the more traditional ideas around sort of headcount reduction or whatever, and that really is not where this is. At least the current implementations are not leading there. Over time, I think they inevitably do, but that really isn't the basis of justification. It is much more around the opportunities there are for very tangible revenue improvements and savings improvements by having these disciplines in place. Arthur, if I may, I'm going to just give you a very quick fire through 3 questions, if we can, and some of them are pretty much yes/no answers, I think. Mary asks, is Ultria CLM cloud-based?
Yes, it is cloud-based.
And then we have another interesting question. I hope this is one you can do in a couple of words. From my experience with various CLM tools, compliance with record retention policies seems to be an area that's often overlooked with CLM tools. Is there a reason for this?
I'm going to say yes. Okay, I think the reason why it's often overlooked is people look at CLMs as a permanent archival. We, for instance, with Ultria, understand that the record retention rules are there for risk mitigation. So if paper should go away after 7 years, it should go away. So the appropriate archival deletion and permanent deletion or removal is something that is only now starting to kick in. And I think sort of the next generation solutions like Ultria have taken that quite seriously. But that was the original reason, is people just assume that it's a filing cabinet. Leave it there, it's fine. They're wrong.
Will Ultria be Windows 365 compatible?
It is Windows 365. Okay, if the reference, of course, is Windows 365 being cloud-based deployed Microsoft product, most people are thinking in terms of Outlook or Exchange, and we are compliant already. So yes, we are compliant, and we welcome it.
Well, a lot of very very pleasant comments that are coming in. Great presentation, magnificent presentation is one of them. So I'm delighted, obviously, that everybody's enjoyed it as much as they have. And for the many who are then saying, well, so are we able to get a copy of this? The answer, you probably weren't here at the beginning, but Mark explained that yes, we will be sending a link out to this recording. So you will have the opportunity to look at this again, share it with colleagues, and of course I have no doubt at all that Arthur will be absolutely delighted. If you want to get in touch with him, he'll be, I'm sure, at your beck and call. So Arthur, we're over time. Thank you so much for this. I think great depiction of where contract lifecycle management is going. Obviously, particularly at the end there, those conversations around the role that AI and blockchain are going to begin to implement, and the fact that Ultria is absolutely embracing those concepts to ensure that we really do have a fit-for-purpose 21st century solution. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Oh, Tim, thank you very much for letting us participate. And thank you all the attendees for taking the time out today. Thanks very much. Cheers.
Bye for now.